The red dust swirled up from the parched earth like angry spirits, coating everything in its path with a fine layer of grit. The afternoon sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless sky, bearing down on the small town of Cedar Ridge as if trying to squeeze the last drop of moisture from the already bone-dry land. In the distance, the silver-gray mountains stood like silent sentinels, their peaks shimmering in the heat haze that rose from the desert floor. Cedar Ridge wasn't much to look at, a collection of weathered buildings huddled along a single main street, their wooden facades bleached pale by years of unforgiving sun. The general store, the saloon, the church with its crooked steeple, and a handful of other establishments made up the heart of the town. Beyond that, scattered homesteads and ranches dotted the landscape like lonely islands in a sea of sagebrush and red rock. At the edge of town, where the buildings gave way to open range, stood a modest ranch house. It had seen better days, that was certain. The porch sagged slightly on one end, and the paint had long since peeled away, leaving bare wood exposed to the elements. This was the home of Samuel Wade, though most folks just called him Wade or that Wade fellow when they spoke of him at all. Wade was a man who wore solitude like a second skin, somewhere past 30, though his weathered face made it hard to tell exactly. He had the look of someone who'd been carved from the same unforgiving rock as the mountains themselves. His hands were rough as old leather, his shoulders broad from years of hard labor, and his eyes, gray as winter storm clouds, held a coldness that kept most people at a respectful distance. He'd been running his ranch alone for near on 5 years now, ever since. Well, folks had learned not to bring up the past around Wade. He kept to himself, worked his cattle, mended his fences, and came to town only when necessity demanded it. The townsfolk had grown accustomed to his ways, giving him a wide berth when he did appear, hat pulled low over his eyes, conducting his business with as few words as possible. On this particular afternoon, Wade was in the barn, repairing a broken harness, when the sound of hoofbeats on the road made him look up. A wagon was approaching, kicking up clouds of dust as it rattled along the rutted track. Wade squinted against the glare, making out the shape of Tom Morrison from town driving, and beside him, a woman he didn't recognize. The wagon pulled up in front of the general store, and Wade watched from the shadow of his barn as Tom helped the woman down. She was young, maybe 25, dressed in morning black despite the heat. A small boy, no more than 4 or 5, clung to her skirts, his eyes wide as he took in the unfamiliar surroundings. The woman's face was pale beneath her bonnet, and there was a weariness in the way she moved that spoke of long travel and heavy burdens. Wade turned back to his work, but his mind kept wandering to the scene he'd witnessed. New arrivals in Cedar Ridge were rare enough to be noteworthy, especially a woman traveling alone with a child. By evening, the whole town was buzzing with the news. Wade heard it all when he reluctantly made his way to Murphy's general store for supplies he couldn't put off buying any longer. Names: Eleanor Cross. Mrs., Murphy was saying to a cluster of women gathered near the fabric display. Widow woman, lost her husband to the fever back in Missouri. Got no kin to speak of, and barely 2 coins to rub together. Lord have mercy, clucked Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife. What's she planning to do here? Looking for work, she says. Mrs., Murphy replied, lowering her voice conspiratorially. But you know there ain't much honest work for a woman alone in these parts. The women exchanged meaningful glances, and Wade felt his jaw tighten. He knew what they were thinking, what they were implying. A young widow with no money and no family was vulnerable in ways that proper ladies didn't speak of directly. Someone ought to do something. Mrs. Henderson ventured. Christian charity and all. Well, I certainly can't take her in. Mrs. Patterson said quickly. What would people think? A woman like that under my roof? Wade grabbed his supplies and left before he heard more. But the damage was done. The seed of an idea, unwelcome and persistent, had taken root in his mind. Over the next few days, the situation grew more complicated. Eleanor Cross had taken a room at Mrs. Donnelly's boarding house, but it was clear she couldn't afford it for long. She had been seen going from business to business, seeking employment, but always leaving empty-handed. The boy, James, Wade had learned his name was, stayed close to his mother, his small hand clutched in hers as they made their rounds. The talk in town grew more pointed. Some of the men at the saloon made crude jokes about the opportunities a desperate widow might consider. The women whispered about the impropriety of it all, how it reflected poorly on the town to have such a situation unresolved. It was Pastor Williams who finally said it out loud, though he couched it in scripture and circumlocution, after Sunday service, as the congregation filed out into the blazing noon sun. He pulled Wade aside. "Samuel," he said, using Wade's given name as he always did, as if formality might bridge the gap Wade kept between himself and others. "I've been praying on our situation." Wade said nothing, just waited. "That poor woman and her child." The pastor continued, "It's a test of our Christian duty, I believe, and I couldn't help but think, well, you're a man of property, established in the community, and that is to say, you have no family obligations at present." The implication hung in the air between them like dust motes in sunlight. Wade's expression didn't change, but something cold and hard settled in his stomach. "What exactly are you suggesting, Pastor?" The older man had the grace to look uncomfortable. "Only that sometimes Providence presents us with opportunities to do good that might also benefit our own standing. A man of your age, living alone. People talk, you understand, and here's a respectable woman in need of protection. A home for her child. You want me to marry her?" It wasn't a question. "I want you to consider what would be best for everyone involved," Pastor Williams said carefully. "Your reputation, her safety, the child's future. Sometimes duty and propriety align in ways we don't expect." Wade left without another word, but the conversation haunted him. He'd built his solitary life deliberately, brick by brick, after everything. The thought of disrupting it, of letting anyone pass the walls he'd constructed, made his chest tight with something that might have been panic if Wade allowed himself such emotions. But the talk wouldn't stop. Each trip to town brought new pressure, subtle and not so subtle. The other ranchers made comments about the awkward situation. The ladies of the town found ways to mention how unfortunate it all was, how something should be done. Even his few business associates hinted that a family man might find more favorable terms in future dealings. Wade saw Eleanor Cross again a week after her arrival. She was at the general store, counting out coins with painful precision while Mrs. Murphy tallied up a meager collection of goods. The boy stood beside her, thin and too quiet for a child his age. "I'm afraid that's not quite enough, Mrs. Cross." "Mrs." Murphy said, not unkindly but firmly. Eleanor's shoulders sagged almost imperceptibly. "Of course, perhaps just the flour then, and put it on my account." The words were out before Wade could stop them. Both women turned to stare at him. Eleanor's face flushed pink beneath her bonnet. "I couldn't possibly," she began. "You could and you will," Wade said gruffly. "Mrs. Murphy, the lady's goods go on my account." He turned and left before either woman could respond, but he felt Eleanor's eyes on his back all the way to the door. That night, Wade sat on his porch, smoking his pipe and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. The desert night was cooling quickly, as it always did, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. He thought about duty and propriety, about the weight of other people's expectations and the careful life he'd built in isolation. He thought about gray eyes that had looked at him with a mixture of pride and desperation, about a small boy who needed more than his mother could provide alone. Most of all, he thought about the strange algebra of survival in a hard land, where sometimes saving face and saving lives amounted to the same thing. The next morning, Wade put on his best shirt, the one he wore to church when he bothered to go, and rode into town. He found Eleanor Cross sitting on a bench outside the boarding house, mending what looked like the boy's only pair of pants. "Mrs. Cross," he said, hat in hand. She looked up, startled. "Mr. Wade, I wanted to thank you for yesterday. I'll repay you as soon as... I've come to make you an offer." He interrupted. "A business proposition, you might say." She set down her sewing, wariness creeping into her expression. "What kind of proposition?" Wade had rehearsed the words, but they still came out stiff and awkward. "I need a wife. You need a home. Seems we might come to an arrangement that suits us both." The color drained from her face. "Mr. Wade, It would be a marriage in name only," he said quickly. "You'd have your own room, you and the boy. I'd provide for you both, give you respectability and protection. In return, you'd keep house, help with the ranch work as you're able. Nothing more." She was silent for a long moment, studying his face. "And why would you do this?" Wade's jaw tightened. "My reasons are my own. The question is whether the arrangement suits you." Eleanor looked down at her son, playing quietly with a handful of pebbles at her feet. When she looked back up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her voice was steady. "When?" "Saturday. If it suits, Pastor Williams can perform the ceremony." She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Wade." They were married 3 days later in a simple ceremony attended by only the necessary witnesses. Eleanor wore the same black dress she'd arrived in, and Wade wore his church shirt. The boy stood between them, confused but quiet. Pastor Williams performed the service with obvious relief. The town's moral dilemma resolved to everyone's satisfaction. When it came time for the kiss that would seal their union, Wade barely brushed his lips against Eleanor's cheek. She stood rigid as a fence post, her eyes fixed on some point past his shoulder. As they signed the register, Wade heard Mrs. Patterson whisper to Mrs. Henderson, "Well, at least he's done the right thing, saved his reputation and hers too." But riding back to the ranch in the wagon, with Eleanor silent beside him and the boy dozed between them, Wade wondered who exactly had been saved, and from what. The afternoon sun beat down as mercilessly as ever, and the dust rose up to meet them as they headed toward a house that would now hold 3 souls instead of 1, bound together by necessity and propriety rather than affection. That night, after showing Eleanor to her room, the one that had stood empty for 5 years, Wade sat alone on the porch again. Inside, he could hear her moving about, settling the boy, trying to make a home out of a stranger's house. The walls he'd built so carefully were still standing, but now they enclosed others within their boundaries. He'd saved face, certainly, given the town what it wanted, protected a woman and child from destitution and worse. But as the stars wheeled overhead in the vast desert sky, Samuel Wade couldn't shake the feeling that something had ended that day, and something else, uncertain and unwanted, had begun. The first week passed in a careful dance of avoidance. Eleanor rose before dawn to prepare breakfast, and by the time Wade came in from checking the stock, she'd retreat to busy herself with other tasks. They moved around each other like 2 cats sharing territory, never quite meeting eyes, speaking only when necessary. "Coffee's ready," she'd say. "Obliged." He'd respond, and that would be the extent of their morning conversation. Eleanor proved herself capable from the start. The house, neglected for years under Wade's bachelor care, began to show signs of a woman's touch. Curtains appeared at windows that had long stood bare. The floors were swept daily instead of weekly. The smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen each afternoon. But it was the boy, James, who served as the only bridge between them. He was a quiet child, watchful in the way of children who've learned early that the world can be unpredictable. He'd shadow his mother as she worked, but his eyes would follow Wade with a mixture of curiosity and caution. One morning, Wade found the boy standing by the corral, watching as he saddled his horse. "You know about horses, boy?" Wade asked gruffly. James shook his head but didn't retreat. "This here's Dusty. Been with me near 7 years now." Wade found himself talking to fill the silence. "Good horse. Steady. Can I touch him?" The question was barely a whisper. Wade hesitated, then nodded. "Hold your hand flat. Let him smell you first." The smile that broke across the boy's face when Dusty's soft nose touched his palm was the first genuine happiness Wade had seen from either of his new family members. That small moment seemed to shift something, though Wade couldn't say what exactly. Eleanor still kept her distance, but she began to speak more at meals, asking about the ranch operations, the livestock, the weather patterns. Drought's been hard on everyone, Wade explained one evening over a supper of beans and salt pork. Lost near 30 head last year. Water holes dried up faster than we could move the herd. My husband used to say drought follows the plow. Eleanor offered quietly. Back in Missouri, the old-timers blamed the farmers for changing the weather. It was the first time she'd mentioned her late husband voluntarily. Wade didn't know how to respond, so he just nodded and continued eating. The conflicts began small, as conflicts do. Wade came in one afternoon to find Eleanor had rearranged the main room, moving his chair from its spot by the window. "Put it back," he said without preamble. She looked up from her mending, startled. "I thought it would be better by the fire." It was fine where it was. Has been for 5 years. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Of course. My apologies." She moved the chair back, but the air between them grew colder than before. The next disagreement came over money. Eleanor approached him after breakfast with a list written in careful script. "We need supplies," she said. "The boy needs new shoes, and we're low on flour, and we have what we need." Wade interrupted. "His shoes have holes in them. Mr. Wade, winter's coming. Then patch them." She drew herself up straighter. "I'm not asking for luxuries. These are necessities. And I'm telling you we make do with what we have. That's how it's done out here. Making do is one thing. Letting a child go cold-footed through winter is another." They stared at each other across the kitchen table, neither willing to give ground. Finally, Eleanor turned away. "As you wish. You've made it clear this is merely a business arrangement. I shouldn't have expected more." The words stung more than Wade cared to admit. The tension in the house grew thick as summer dust. Eleanor performed her duties with rigid efficiency but withdrew any warmth she might have offered. Meals were eaten in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks on plates. It was James who suffered most from the Cold War between the adults. He grew quieter, spending more time outside, making friends with the barn cats and watching the chickens. Wade found him one afternoon trying to climb the corral fence. "Get down from there before you break your neck," Wade ordered. The boy scrambled down, looking scared. "I just wanted to see better." "See what?" "The horses. How you make them listen to you." Wade studied the boy's thin face, seeing genuine interest there, against his better judgment. He heard himself saying, "You can watch, but from outside the fence, and only when I'm here." James's face lit up. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." That evening, Eleanor cornered Wade on the porch. "I appreciate your kindness to James," she said stiffly. "But I'd ask you not to fill his head with notions." "What notions?" "Ranch work, horses, this life." She gestured at the vast, empty landscape. "We won't be here forever." Wade felt something cold settle in his chest. "That's so? This arrangement is temporary. Once I've saved enough money, James and I will move on, perhaps to California, or back east where he can get proper schooling." "I see." Wade's voice was flat. "And when were you planning on informing me of these plans?" "I assumed you understood. You made it clear this was a business arrangement. Nothing more. A marriage is a marriage. Mrs. Wade." He emphasized her new name deliberately. "Legal and binding." "Are you threatening me?" Her voice rose slightly. "I'm stating facts. You wanted respectability and protection. I provided both. You don't get to pick and choose which parts of the bargain suit you." Eleanor's face flushed. "And what about what you wanted? To save face? To keep the town from gossiping about the lonely rancher too set in his ways to find a proper wife?" The words hit their mark. Wade stood abruptly. "You know nothing about it." "Don't I? The whole town knows Samuel Wade is a man who keeps his grief locked up tighter than his cash box. They whisper about what happened to—" Enough. His voice was low and dangerous. Eleanor fell silent, but her eyes blazed with anger and something else, perhaps pity, which was worse. Wade left without another word, saddling Dusty and riding out into the gathering dusk. He didn't return until well after midnight, finding the house dark and silent. The next morning, a pair of new shoes sat on the kitchen table, boy-sized, sturdy leather, the kind that would last through winter and beyond. Eleanor said nothing when she saw them, but she made Wade's favorite biscuits for breakfast. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something. The days settled into an uneasy truce. Wade began teaching James about horses, showing him how to curry Dusty's coat and clean hooves. The boy was a quick learner, eager to please and careful with the animals. Eleanor watched from the kitchen window, her expression unreadable. One afternoon, Wade came in to find her struggling with the water pump in the kitchen. The handle wouldn't budge, and she was putting all her weight behind it. "Let me," he said, moving her aside. "I can manage. Pump's been sticking. Needs grease." He worked the handle expertly, and water began to flow. "I'll show you the trick to it." She watched as he demonstrated the particular angle needed when the mechanism stuck. Their hands brushed accidentally as she took over the handle, and both pulled back as if burned. "Thank you," she said quietly. "It's nothing." But he found himself fixing other things without being asked. A loose board on the porch, a gap in the chicken coop that let in drafts, small things that made her daily work easier. The townspeople noticed the changes. When the Wade family, and wasn't that a strange thought, appeared at church, they presented a respectable front, Eleanor in her black dress but with a new bonnet Wade hadn't known she'd purchased, James in his sturdy shoes and clean, mended clothes, Wade himself standing stiff and uncomfortable in his church clothes. "Marriage agrees with you, Samuel," Mrs. Henderson commented after service. "You're looking well fed for once." "Eleanor's a fine cook," he admitted grudgingly, "and the boy's filling out nicely. Amazing what a stable home can do for a child." Wade glanced over to where James was shyly talking with some of the other children. It was true. The boy had lost that pinched, hungry look he'd arrived with. "Speaking of which, Mrs. Henderson continued, lowering her voice, "I do hope you're planning on making this a proper family. A boy needs siblings, and Eleanor's young yet." Wade's face closed off completely. "Good day, Mrs. Henderson." He collected Eleanor and James and headed for the wagon, ignoring the knowing looks that followed them. The ride home was silent until James piped up from the back. "Ma, why did that lady say I need siblings?" Eleanor's face flamed. "Hush, James. It's not polite to repeat other people's conversations. But what are siblings?" "Brothers and sisters," Wade said shortly, "which you don't need to worry about." He felt Eleanor's quick glance, but kept his eyes on the road. Some boundaries weren't meant to be crossed, no matter what the town gossips expected. That night, after James was asleep, Eleanor approached Wade on the porch. He was smoking his pipe, watching the stars as was his habit. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the other chair. He nodded. They sat in silence for a while before she spoke. "We can't go on like this." "Like what?" "Living as strangers. It's affecting James. He doesn't understand why—" She paused, choosing her words. "Why his new father barely speaks to his mother." Wade took a long draw on his pipe. "What do you want from me?" "Civility, conversation, something that resembles a normal household, for the boy's sake, if nothing else. And what do I get in return?" She turned to look at him directly. "I'll stop talking about leaving. I'll commit to making this work, whatever this is, but you have to meet me halfway." Wade considered her words, studying her face in the dim light. The moonlight softened her features, made her look younger than her years despite the grief lines around her eyes. "Fair enough," he said finally. "For the boy's sake." She stood to go inside, then paused. "Samuel, what did happen? The townspeople whisper, but no one says clearly." His face hardened. That's not part of our bargain." "No," she agreed softly. "I suppose it's not. Good night." As she disappeared inside, Wade sat alone with his ghosts, wondering if he'd ever be ready to share the weight of them with another soul. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent to human struggle, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate across the empty miles. The storm announced itself with a wall of black clouds that rolled in from the mountains like an advancing army. Wade had seen its like before, the kind of tempest that could tear a ranch apart if you weren't prepared. He spent the afternoon securing everything he could, driving the horses into the barn, checking the cattle were in the most sheltered pastures. "Eleanor," he called, bursting through the kitchen door. "Storm coming? Bad one. Need to secure the shutters." She looked up from kneading bread, flour dusting her arms. "How bad?" "Bad enough. Where's the boy?" "Playing out back." Her eyes widened with sudden fear. "James." They both rushed outside. The wind was already picking up, sending dust devils spinning across the yard. James was nowhere to be seen. "James!" Eleanor's voice cracked with panic. "James! Come here right now!" Wade scanned the property with practiced eyes. "The chicken coop. He likes to gather eggs." They found him there, crouched in the corner with a basket of eggs, eyes wide with fear as the wind rattled the rickety structure. "Come on, boy!" Wade scooped him up, basket and all. "Time to get inside." They made it to the house just as the first fat raindrops began to fall. Within minutes, it became a deluge. The wind howled like a living thing, battering the house with fury Wade hadn't seen in years. "The roof won't hold," he muttered, watching water already beginning to seep through weak spots in the ceiling. Not the whole night. Eleanor had lit every lamp they owned, creating pools of warm light against the storm's darkness. "What do we do?" "We fight." Wade grabbed buckets, pots, anything that would hold water. "And we pray." The next hours were a battle. The storm seemed determined to tear their shelter apart board by board. A section of roof over the back room gave way with a tremendous crash, sending water pouring in. Wade rushed to move what furniture he could while Eleanor gathered blankets and essentials. "We need to move to the main room," Wade shouted over the wind. "It's the strongest part of the house." They huddled together near the fireplace. James pressed between them, trembling. The boy had gone silent with fear, his small hands clutching his mother's dress. Another crash, shutters torn from the window. Rain drove in horizontally, soaking everything. Wade jumped up to nail boards over the opening, fighting against the wind that tried to rip the hammer from his hands. "Samuel!" Eleanor's scream cut through the storm's roar. He turned to see part of the ceiling beginning to buckle directly above where they sat. Without thinking, Wade threw himself over Eleanor and James, pulling them against the wall just as a beam came crashing down where they'd been moments before. For a heartbeat, they stayed frozen, Wade's body shielding them both. Eleanor's hands clutched in his shirt. James pressed between them. Wade could feel Eleanor's heart racing against his chest, her breath warm on his neck. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently. No, we're fine." Her voice was shaky. "I'm all right." But he didn't move away immediately. Some instinct keeping him positioned between his family and danger. His family. When had he started thinking of them that way? The storm raged on, but they had found their rhythm now. Wade would brave the wind and rain to shore up failing defenses, while Eleanor kept James calm and moved their supplies away from the growing leaks. They worked as a team, communicating with gestures and glances when the wind made words impossible. Near midnight, the storm's fury finally began to abate. The wind dropped from a roar to a moan, and the rain slowed from a battering assault to a steady patter. Wade surveyed the damage by lamplight. Half the roof gone from the back room, windows broken, water damage throughout. "We made it," Eleanor said softly. She was sitting on the floor, James asleep in her lap, exhausted from terror. Wade slumped against the wall beside them. "We did. You saved us. When that beam fell." "You'd have done the same." She looked at him strangely. Yeah, I suppose I would have. They sat in companionable silence, listening to the storm's death throes. Wade found himself studying Eleanor's profile in the lamplight. Her hair had come loose from its usual severe bun, falling in damp tendrils around her face. There was a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and her dress was torn at the shoulder. "You fought hard tonight," he said quietly. A small smile touched her lips. "I had things worth fighting for." Their eyes met and held for a long moment. Wade felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of bonds he'd held tight for so long. "Samuel," she began, then stopped. "Your shirt, you're bleeding." He looked down, surprised to see red seeping through the fabric. "Must have caught it on something. It's nothing. It's not nothing." She carefully shifted James to a makeshift bed of blankets and moved closer to Wade. "Let me see." He started to protest, then submitted to her gentle hands unbuttoning his shirt. A gash ran across his ribs, not deep but bleeding steadily. "This needs cleaning," she said firmly, "and bandaging." She fetched water and clean cloth, her movements efficient despite the chaos around them. Wade sat still as she worked, trying not to think about how long it had been since anyone had touched him with such care. "There," she said, tying off the bandage. "That should hold. Thank you." She sat back but didn't move away. "Samuel, during the storm, when you covered us, I felt—" "Eleanor, no, let me speak." She took a breath. "I've been unfair to you. I came here with my own grief, my own anger at the world, and I took it out on you. You offered us safety and shelter, and I repaid you with coldness and talk of leaving. You had every right. This wasn't what you chose. Neither of us chose this. Not really, but we're here now." She looked at James, sleeping peacefully despite the destruction around them. "And tonight, I saw who you really are. Not the cold rancher the town talks about, but a man who would risk himself to protect others." Wade's throat felt tight. "Don't make me out to be something I'm not." "I'm not. I'm seeing you clearly for the first time." She paused. "What happened to you, Samuel? What made you build these walls so high?" The question hung in the air between them. Wade had deflected it before, shut it down, but tonight felt different. The storm had stripped away more than shingles and shutters. "I had a wife," he said slowly, the words rusty from disuse. "Margaret, and a daughter, Lucy. She was 3. Eleanor waited, patient in the dim light. "Happened 5 years back. I was away, moving cattle to summer pasture. Raiders came through, deserters from the war. Some said, though it didn't matter much who they were, they wanted food, money, whatever they could take." His voice went flat, emotionless. "Margaret tried to give them what they wanted. Wasn't enough. By the time I got back," he couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Eleanor's hand found his, a gentle pressure in the darkness. "The town helped me bury them. Helped me rebuild what was burned. But they couldn't help with—" He gestured vaguely at his chest. "So I just kept going. Working, surviving. It was easier alone. Until we came along. Until you came along." He agreed. "And now I've got another family under a broken roof in a storm. And I couldn't—" His voice cracked slightly. "I couldn't let it happen again." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "It didn't happen again. We're here. We're safe. Because of you." They sat together as the last of the storm passed over, hands linked, watching James sleep. When Eleanor finally dozed off, her head came to rest on Wade's shoulder. He stayed awake, keeping watch, feeling the weight of her trust like a physical thing. When dawn broke pale and watery through the remaining windows, it revealed a transformed landscape. The storm had scoured away the familiar, leaving debris and damage in its wake. But it had also cleared the air, washed the dust from everything, left the world feeling new and raw. Wade carefully extracted himself from Eleanor's sleeping form and stepped outside. The damage was worse in daylight. They'd be weeks repairing it all. But as he stood surveying the wreckage, he felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Hope. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, James rubbing sleepy eyes beside her. "Oh my," she breathed, taking in the devastation. We'll rebuild, Wade said simply. Together. She moved to stand beside him, and they surveyed their battered kingdom side by side. Together, she agreed. James tugged on Wade's torn shirt. Are we going to fix it all? Wade looked down at the boy, then did something that surprised them all. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his weathered face. We are, son, every last board and shingle. The word son hung in the air between them, unexpected and profound. James beamed up at him, and Eleanor's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. They spent that day clearing debris and assessing damage, working as a unit. Neighbors began arriving by afternoon, bringing food and offering help, the desert code of mutual aid in times of crisis. But Wade noticed how different their reception was now. The looks were warmer, the offers of help more genuine. He and Eleanor were no longer a strange arrangement to be gossiped about. They were a family that had weathered a storm together. That night, with temporary patches on the worst of the damage and blankets hung where windows used to be, they sat together by the fire. James was teaching Wade a clapping game he'd known from Missouri, laughing when Wade's calloused hands couldn't quite keep the rhythm. Eleanor watched them with a soft expression that made Wade's chest tight. What? He asked, self-conscious. Nothing, she said. Just this, it's nice. And it was. For the first time in 5 years, the house felt like more than just shelter. It felt like home. The drought began subtly, the way disasters often do. First, the morning dew stopped appearing on the grass. Then the creek that ran through the eastern pastures slowed to a trickle. By the time Wade acknowledged what was happening, the sky had turned to brass, and the earth was beginning to crack like old leather. We'll need to move the herd closer to the main well, Wade announced over breakfast, studying the cloudless sky through the window. What grass there is won't last long. Eleanor nodded, pouring coffee with hands that had grown steady and brown from months of ranch work. How bad do you think it'll get? Bad enough. He didn't sugarcoat it. Seen droughts before. This has the feel of a long one. She'd learned to read his moods by now, the subtle tightening around his eyes that meant real worry. What do we need to do? Conserve everything. Water most of all. Might have to sell off some stock before they get too thin. The words tasted bitter. Every rancher knew that selling during a drought meant taking whatever price the buyers offered. James looked up from his breakfast. Will Dusty be all right? Dusty'll be fine. Boy, we take care of our own first. But taking care of their own grew harder as the weeks passed without rain. The garden Eleanor had coaxed to life withered despite her careful watering. The chickens stopped laying regularly. Even the hardy range cattle began to show ribs through their hides. Wade spent long days ranging farther and farther, looking for grass, checking water sources. He'd come home dust-covered and grim, shoulders bent with more than exhaustion. Lost 2 more head today. He'd report, found them by Devil's Canyon, just gave up. Eleanor would serve whatever meal she'd managed to scratch together, beans and cornbread, mostly. Their supplies dwindling as surely as the water, and they'd eat in worried silence. The financial troubles came to a head when Jake Morrison from the bank rode out on a blazing afternoon. Wade saw him coming and knew it meant nothing good. Bankers didn't make social calls during business hours. Samuel, Morrison greeted, not bothering to dismount. Afraid I've got some uncomfortable business to discuss. Then discuss it. Morrison pulled out a ledger, making a show of consulting it. Your loan payment's coming due next month. Given the current circumstances, the bank's concerned about your ability to meet it. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She didn't speak, but her presence steadied Wade. I've never missed a payment, Wade said evenly. No, but you've never faced a drought like this with a family to support. Morrison's eyes flicked to Eleanor. The bank might be willing to extend terms for additional collateral. What kind of collateral? The eastern pasture would do nicely? Wade's jaw tightened. That was his best grazing land. Or it was when there was grass to graze. That's robbery, and you know it. It's business. Morrison closed his ledger with a snap. "You've got 2 weeks to consider. After that," he shrugged eloquently. After he left, Wade slumped against the porch rail. "Vultures. They're all vultures, circling, waiting for us to drop." Eleanor moved beside him. "How much is the payment?" $40. Might as well be 400, the way things are. We'll find a way." "How?" The word came out harsher than he intended. "Can't sell cattle that are skin and bones. Can't grow crops in dust. Can't make water from wishes." She was quiet for a moment. "I could take in washing, mending, some of the town ladies." "No." His pride reared up. "My wife doesn't do other people's laundry." "Your wife does whatever needs doing to save this ranch," she shot back. "Or have you forgotten why you married me? For appearances?" "Well, there's nothing appearing about losing everything to the bank." They glared at each other in the shimmering heat. Then Wade's shoulders sagged. "You're right. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be smart." She touched his arm. "We're partners, remember? For better or worse, this is the worst part." Eleanor proved as good as her word. She approached the task of saving the ranch like a general planning a campaign. First, she inventoried everything they had, down to the last sack of flour and ball of twine. Then she made lists. What could be sold? What could be traded? What they absolutely couldn't do without. "Your father's watch," she said one evening, pointing to the gold piece Wade kept in a drawer. "That would bring something." No. The refusal was automatic. Samuel, it was his father's before him. "It stays." She moved on without argument, but he saw her note something in her ledger. Eleanor took in washing. Despite Wade's protests, she also bartered eggs for supplies, mended clothes for the town ladies in exchange for preserved foods, and somehow stretched their meager resources to keep them fed. Wade watched her work herself to exhaustion and felt shame burn in his gut. But he worked too, harder than ever. He and James dug a new well, going deeper than he'd ever had to before, finally hitting water at 20 feet. It wasn't much, but it was something. He repaired fences with salvaged wire, doctored sick cattle with remedies his father had taught him, and swallowed his pride to work day labor at neighboring ranches when they needed hands. One evening, he came home to find Eleanor teaching James his numbers by lamplight. She'd made a slate from a flat piece of stone and was using charcoal for chalk. The boy was concentrating fiercely, tongue poking out as he formed shaky figures. "Very good," Eleanor praised. "Now, if we have 6 chickens and trade 2 for flour, how many do we have left?" 4, James announced proudly. "That's right." She ruffled his hair, then noticed Wade in the doorway. "You're home early." Henderson didn't need me after all. He didn't mention that Henderson had tried to pay him in pity rather than cash, and Wade had walked off rather than accept charity. Eleanor studied his face. "Wash up. Supper's ready." It was bean soup again, but she'd added wild herbs that grew by the creek bed, giving it flavor beyond their poverty. Wade ate mechanically, trying not to think about the banker's deadline approaching like a storm front. After James was in bed, Eleanor sat at the table with her ledgers spread before her. "We're close," she said. "So close. $28 saved. If I can get the Morrison order finished, and if Mrs. Patterson pays what she owes. Still leaves us short. I know." She rubbed her temples. "I know." Wade watched her in the lamplight, the determined set of her jaw, the way she bit her lip when calculating, the strength in her work-worn hands. When had this woman become so essential to him? "Eleanor," he said quietly, "whatever happens, I want you to know. What you've done here, what you've built, I'm grateful." She looked up, surprised. "We've built it together?" "No, I had a house and land. You made it a home. You made us a family." He struggled with words that didn't come easily. "If I lose the ranch, I'll find a way to provide for you and James. I promise you that." Her eyes grew bright. "You won't lose it. We won't lose it." She reached across the table to take his hand. "Have faith. Faith. Wade had lost his faith 5 years ago, along with everything else. But looking at Eleanor's fierce determination, he felt something stir that might have been hope. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Tom Garrett from the Double Bar Ranch rode in leading a string of horses. "Wade," he called. "Heard you might be in the market for some work." Wade approached cautiously. The Double Bar was the largest spread in the valley, and Garrett wasn't known for charity. "What kind of work?" "Got a contract to supply horses to the Army. Problem is, they need to be broken first. You've got the best hand with horses in 3 counties. Garrett named a price that made Wade's breath catch. "Need them gentled in 2 weeks. Can you do it?" Wade looked at the horses, half-wild mustangs with rolling eyes and tossing heads. It would be dangerous work, exhausting, but "I can do it." Eleanor appeared with water for Garrett. "Mr. Garrett, how nice to see you. How's Mrs. Garrett?" "Well enough, ma'am. Though she mentioned she's been hoping to find someone to help with the household accounts. She's got no head for figures." Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "Is that so?" By the time Garrett left, Eleanor had secured additional work for herself, and Wade had his chance to earn the money they desperately needed. It felt like the first good luck they'd had in months. Wade threw himself into breaking the horses with single-minded determination. From dawn to dusk, he worked in the corral, speaking softly to skittish animals, teaching trust through patience and consistency. James watched from his safe perch on the fence, absorbing every lesson. "Why don't you use the whip like Mr. Henderson does?" the boy asked one day. "Because fear makes a horse unreliable," Wade explained, never taking his eyes off the mare he was working. "Trust makes a partner. Which would you rather have when your life depends on it?" Eleanor brought him lunch in the field, staying to watch him work. "You're good at this," she observed. "Patient. Horses are simple," Wade said. "They don't lie or pretend. Earn their trust. They give you everything." "People aren't so different," Eleanor said softly. "Just more complicated." Their eyes met across the dusty corral, and Wade felt that now familiar tightening in his chest. Complicated. Yes, that was one word for what was happening between them. On the 10th day, with 4 horses left to break, Wade made a mistake. Exhaustion made him careless, and the stallion he was working caught him with a kick that sent him flying into the fence. He came to with Eleanor's white face hovering over him. "Don't move," she commanded. "James has gone for the doctor. No doctor." Wade tried to sit up, gasping as pain shot through his ribs. "Can't afford—" "Hush!" Her hands were gentle but firm. "Some things matter more than money." The doctor confirmed what Wade suspected. Cracked ribs, deep bruising, but nothing that wouldn't heal with rest. Rest he couldn't afford with the deadline looming and their future hanging in the balance. "I'll finish the horses," he announced the next morning, trying to ignore the stabbing pain as he pulled on his boots. "You will not!" Eleanor blocked the door, arms crossed. "You can barely stand. The payment will be made." She lifted her chin. "I'll finish the horses." Wade would have laughed if it wouldn't have hurt so much. "Eleanor, you don't know the first thing about breaking horses. Then you'll teach me, from right here on the porch where you can see everything." Her jaw was set in that stubborn line he'd come to recognize. "We're partners, remember? Time you trusted me the way you trust those horses." And so Wade found himself directing from the porch, calling out instructions while Eleanor worked in the corral. She was awkward at first, too tense, but she listened with the same intensity she brought to everything. James helped, fetching equipment and offering encouragement. "Easy now," Wade coached as she approached a skittish mare. "Let her come to you." That's it. Patience wins the day. By the 3rd horse, Eleanor had found her rhythm. She might not have Wade's natural grace with the animals, but she had her own gift, a quiet steadiness that seemed to calm them. The work that would have taken Wade 2 days took her 4, but she got it done. The night before Garrett was due to collect the horses, They sat together on the porch, counting and recounting their money. $37.40. Still short, but close enough that Wade thought they might negotiate. "My hands hurt," Eleanor admitted, showing him blisters that had formed despite the gloves. Wade took her hands gently in his, studying the damage. These hands that had been soft when she arrived were now calloused and strong. He found himself pressing his lips to her palm in a gesture that surprised them both. "Thank you," he said roughly. Eleanor's breath caught. For a moment, they sat frozen, her hands in his, the air between them charged with possibility. Then James called from inside, breaking the spell, and the moment passed. But that night, Wade lay awake thinking about the woman who'd started as a stranger and had become, what? His partner, certainly. His friend, perhaps. Something more? He pushed the thought away. Some walls, once built, were too dangerous to tear down. Still, when he finally slept, he dreamed of Eleanor's hands in his, and for the first time in 5 years, the dreams weren't haunted by loss. The Black Creek gang rode into the valley like a plague of locusts, leaving fear and destruction in their wake. Wade first heard about them from Ben Cooper, whose ranch lay 15 miles north. "They hit the Hendersons last night," Ben reported, his face grim. "Took everything they could carry, shot 2 head of cattle just for spite. Henderson tried to fight back." He shook his head. "Doc says he'll live, but it was close." Wade felt Eleanor's presence behind him in the doorway. "How many?" 8, maybe 10. Led by a man named Dutch McCready. They're working their way south, hitting the isolated places first. After Ben left, Wade found Eleanor in the kitchen, her face pale but determined. "What are we going to do?" "What we have to—" Wade checked his rifle. Then the ammunition stores. "Keep James close to the house. No wandering. Samuel, we can't fight off 10 men. Maybe not, but we can make it costly enough they'll think twice." The gang's pattern was clear. They preyed on the isolated ranches, those too far from town for help to arrive in time. They demanded protection money, though everyone knew protection was the last thing they offered. Pay them, and they'd be back for more. Fight them, and they'd burn you out. Wade spent the next days reinforcing their defenses, such as they were. He boarded up windows, stored water in case of fire, and taught Eleanor to load and shoot the spare rifle. "Aim for the chest," he instructed, guiding her stance. "Bigger target. And Eleanor, if it comes to it, don't hesitate. These aren't men who respond to mercy." She nodded, jaw set. "I'll protect what's mine." The phrase sent an unexpected warmth through Wade. When had this become theirs instead of just his? 3 nights later, they heard the thunder of hooves approaching. Wade had been expecting it. The Martins' place to the east had been hit the night before. He sent Eleanor and James to the root cellar with strict instructions to stay hidden no matter what they heard. "But I want to help," James protested. Wade knelt to the boy's level. "You help by keeping your ma safe. Can you do that for me?" James nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir." Eleanor gripped Wade's arm. "Be careful." "Always am." He pressed his forehead briefly to hers, a moment of connection before the storm. "Bar the cellar door. Don't come out until I call for you." Wade positioned himself at the front window, rifle ready. The riders came in fast, spreading out to surround the house. 8 men, faces hidden by darkness and dust. Their leader, a big man with a distinctive white-handled pistol, called out, "Hello, the house. We're here to discuss a business proposition." "State your business from there." Wade called back, "Now, that's not very neighborly. We've come a long way. Least you could do is offer some hospitality." "You'll get the same hospitality you showed the Hendersons." Dutch McCready laughed. "An ugly sound." "Heard about that. Did you? Henderson should have been more reasonable." "Hope you're smarter. Smart enough to know you're outnumbered." "That's so. I count 1 man in a house with too many windows to watch." "You count wrong." This came from behind the barn, Eleanor's voice, steady and clear. Wade's heart nearly stopped. She'd disobeyed him. Taken position with the spare rifle. Well. McCready drawled, "The lady of the house. This changes things." "Yes," Eleanor called. "It means you're covered from 2 angles. And before you think about rushing the barn, you should know my husband's taught me to shoot. I may not drop all of you, but I'll get enough to make the survivors think hard about their choices." Wade saw uncertainty ripple through the gang. They'd expected easy prey, not armed resistance from multiple positions. "There's 8 of us," McCready said, but some of the confidence had left his voice. "And more coming," Wade added, playing the bluff. "You didn't think we'd face you alone? Every rancher in the valley knows you're here. How long before they arrive?" "You figure?" It was a lie, but delivered with enough conviction that the riders shifted nervously. In the distance, a coyote howled, and one of the horses shied. McCready wasn't stupid. He knew the mathematics of the situation. Even if they took the ranch, losses would be heavy. And if Wade was telling the truth about reinforcements, "You've got spine," he finally said. "I respect that, but this ain't over. We'll be seeing you again. You know where to find us," Wade replied evenly. The gang wheeled their horses and rode off, but Wade knew it was only a temporary reprieve. Men like McCready didn't forget being faced down. Eleanor emerged from the barn, rifle still in hand, and Wade met her halfway across the yard. "I told you to stay in the cellar," he said, caught between anger and admiration. "And let you face them alone? Not a chance." She was trembling now, the reaction setting in. "We're partners, remember?" He pulled her against him, feeling her shake. "You could have been killed. So could you." She looked up at him. "That's what scared me most, the thought of losing you." They stood there in the yard, holding each other, until James's voice called from the cellar. The immediate danger had passed, but they all knew it would return. "We need help," Eleanor said as they sat around the kitchen table later. James finally asleep after the excitement. "We can't face them alone again. The other ranchers are just as scared as we are, but if we stand together—" Wade saw where she was going. "You want to organize them. Why not? There's 20 ranches in this valley. If even half would commit to mutual defense. They won't. Too much bad blood between some. Too much fear in others. Then we make them see reason." Eleanor's eyes blazed with determination. "Samuel, those men are parasites. They exist because we let them, because we're too proud or too scared to work together." Wade knew she was right. The code of the frontier emphasized self-reliance, but that same isolation made them vulnerable. It won't be easy. Garrett doesn't trust Morrison. The Hendersons have that feud with the Coopers. Then we start small, one family at a time. Over the next days, they rode from ranch to ranch. Eleanor did most of the talking. Wade had never been one for speeches. She spoke plainly about the threat they all faced, about the mathematics of survival. "They're 10 men," she told Martha Cooper. "We're 60 families. If we stand together, they're the ones who should be afraid." Some doors closed in their faces. Others listened politely but made no commitments. But slowly, gradually, the idea took root. The attack on Henderson had scared people. Wade and Eleanor's successful stand gave them hope. The meeting was held at the church in town, neutral ground for all the feuding factions. 15 families showed up. Not as many as Eleanor had hoped, but more than Wade had expected. "We need a plan," Eleanor addressed the group. "A signal system. When one ranch is attacked, the others respond." "And who leads this army?" Garrett asked skeptically. "You? No one leads." Wade spoke up. "We cooperate, or we fall separately. Your choice." Arguments broke out immediately. Old grievances surfaced. At one point, it looked like Morrison and Cooper might come to blows over a water rights dispute from 3 years back. Eleanor stood on a chair and whistled, a piercing sound that silenced the room. "Gentlemen, while we're fighting each other, McCready's gang is planning their next attack. Do you want to defend your families or settle old scores?" Shamefaced. The men settled down. By evening, they had a basic plan. Signal fires for communication, a rotation of watches, an agreement to respond when called. "It's not perfect," Wade told Eleanor as they rode home. "Getting this bunch to work together is like herding cats." "It's a start," she replied. "And sometimes a start is all you need." James had fallen asleep between them on the wagon seat, looking at his peaceful face. Wade felt the weight of responsibility. This wasn't just about land or pride anymore. It was about protecting the future, James's future. 3 nights later, the signal fire blazed on Cooper's Hill. The gang had returned. Wade saddled Dusty while Eleanor prepared ammunition and medical supplies. "You're not coming," he said firmly. "Someone needs to stay with James." She agreed. "But Samuel, be careful. Come back to us." "I will." He kissed her then, properly, without hesitation. "I promise." The ride to Cooper's ranch was the longest of Wade's life. Other riders joined him on the road. Morrison, Henderson still bandaged but determined, young Tom Peterson from the neighboring spread. By the time they reached Cooper's, 12 men had assembled. The gang was already engaged, firing from cover at the house, but they hadn't expected resistance from behind. The rancher's arrival changed everything. The fight was chaos in the darkness, muzzle flashes and shouting, the scream of horses and crack of rifles. Wade found himself beside Garrett, the man who'd been skeptical of the whole plan. "Glad you came," Wade shouted over the gunfire. "Your wife's got sand," Garrett replied, squeezing off a shot. "Figured I better show up or she'd never let me hear the end of it." The battle turned quickly, caught between the house and the reinforcements. McCready's gang broke and ran. 3 of them didn't make it to their horses. "Should we pursue?" young Peterson asked, blood up from his first real fight. "No," Wade decided. "Let them spread the word. This valley's no longer easy pickings." They'd won, but Wade knew it wasn't over. As he helped tend the wounded, Cooper had taken a bullet in the shoulder, but would survive. He thought about the nature of victory in a hard land. Sometimes it wasn't about defeating your enemies completely. Sometimes it was just about making the cost too high. When he finally returned home near dawn, Eleanor was waiting on the porch, James asleep in her lap. The relief on her face when she saw him made Wade's throat tight. "It's done," he said simply. "They're gone." She stood, careful not to wake James, and walked into his arms. For now, he agreed. But as he held his family, and they were his family now, completely and irrevocably, Wade knew they'd face whatever came next together. The story of the rancher's defense spread quickly through the territory. Within a week, 3 more valleys had organized similar mutual aid agreements. The Black Creek gang moved on to easier territory, and gradually, peace returned to the region. But the bonds forged in crisis remained. The ranchers who'd fought together found ways to cooperate in other things, sharing water during dry spells, helping with barn raisings, pooling resources for supply runs to town. "You did this," Wade told Eleanor one evening as they watched James playing with the Cooper boys. "Former enemies, now friends. You showed us we're stronger together than apart." "We did this," she corrected. "I may have done the talking, but they followed because they respected you. Because you stood up first." Wade considered this. "Maybe, but I only stood because you were beside me." It was the simple truth. Eleanor had saved more than his life or his ranch. She'd saved him from the isolation he'd wrapped around himself like armor, shown him that some walls were meant to be torn down, that some risks were worth taking. As the sun set over the valley, painting the mountains purple and gold, Wade pulled Eleanor closer. The land was still hard, the future uncertain, but they'd proven something important, that even in the harshest places, community could grow. That love could take root in the rockiest soil. The rancher took the widow to save face, Eleanor murmured, echoing the old gossip with a wry smile. "But she saved his soul," Wade completed, meaning every word. The bullet had torn through Wade's shoulder, spinning him around before he hit the ground hard. The last of McCready's gang had returned for revenge, catching Wade alone, mending fence in the far pasture. He'd managed to get off 2 shots before the world went gray at the edges. And now he lay in the dust, watching his blood seep into the thirsty earth. The ride back to the house was a blur of pain and determination. Dusty, true to his training, had come when whistled for, standing still despite the smell of blood as Wade hauled himself into the saddle. By the time the ranch buildings came into view, Wade was slumped forward, trusting the horse to take him home. "Samuel!" Eleanor's scream cut through his fading consciousness. Then her hands were on him, surprisingly strong, easing him from the saddle. "James, run for Dr. Morrison, fast as you can." "No, Doctor," Wade managed through gritted teeth. "They couldn't afford—" "Hush." Eleanor's voice was fierce. "Don't you dare argue with me, Samuel Wade. Not now." He was aware of being half carried, half dragged into the house, of Eleanor's steady stream of instructions to James before the boy ran off. Then she was cutting away his shirt with steady hands, her face pale but determined. "Still in there," Wade gasped, meaning the bullet. "I know. I can see it." She pressed a folded cloth hard against the wound. "You're going to be fine. Do you hear me? You're going to be fine because I won't allow anything else." The next hours passed in a haze of pain and fever. Dr. Morrison arrived, his hands gentle but the work agonizing. Wade bit down on the leather strap Eleanor gave him, tasting salt and copper, while the doctor probed for the bullet. "Got it," Morrison finally announced. "He's lucky. Inch to the right, and we'd be having a different conversation." Through it all, Eleanor never left his side. Her hand gripped his, anchor and lifeline both. When the doctor finished, prescribing rest and careful watching for infection, she simply nodded and set about making Wade comfortable. "The man who shot me," Wade whispered when they were alone. "Did I?" "Garrett found him 2 miles out. You got him, Samuel. He won't hurt anyone else." Wade closed his eyes, feeling no satisfaction in the knowledge. He was tired of violence, tired of watching over his shoulder, tired of the hardness this life demanded. But mostly, he was just tired. The fever came that night, as Dr. Morrison had warned it might. Wade burned and shivered by turns, lost in dreams that mixed past and present. He was back in the house 5 years ago, trying to save Margaret and Lucy, failing again and again. Then Eleanor was there, cool hands on his forehead, voice cutting through the nightmares. "I'm here," she kept saying. "You're safe. I'm here." He surfaced from one particularly vivid dream to find himself weeping, great shuddering sobs he couldn't control. The grief he'd locked away for 5 years poured out like poison from a wound. "Margaret," he gasped. "Lucy, I wasn't there." Eleanor gathered him against her, careful of his shoulder, rocking him like a child. "It wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. I should have been there, should have protected them. You were providing for them, working to build a life." Her voice was fierce with conviction. "Samuel, you love them. That's what matters. You love them, and they knew it. I can't lose anyone else." The words tore from him raw and desperate. "Eleanor, I can't." "You won't." She pulled back to look at him, her own eyes wet. "You won't lose us. James and I aren't going anywhere. Promise?" He hated how weak he sounded, how needy, but the fever had stripped away all pretense. "I promise." She sealed it with a kiss to his forehead. "Now rest. I'll be right here." The fever broke near dawn. Wade woke clear-headed but weak, his shoulder throbbing but the burning gone. Eleanor was asleep in the chair beside the bed, still in her blood-stained dress from the day before, hand resting on his arm as if to assure herself he was still there. He studied her face in the gentle morning light, the purple shadows under her eyes, the worry lines that hadn't been there 6 months ago, the determined set of her jaw even in sleep. When had this woman become the center of his world? She stirred, eyes opening to meet his. "You're awake. How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," he said dryly, winning a small smile. "Well, that's accurate at least." She sat up, wincing at her stiff muscles. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" Eleanor. He caught her hand before she could bustle away. Thank you. For what? For saving my life. For staying. For... He struggled to find words big enough. For bringing me back. She understood he meant more than just from the fever. Samuel Wade, you infuriating man. When will you understand? We're married, for better or worse, in sickness and health. I take my vows seriously. Even vows made for convenience? Her expression softened. Is that what you think this is? Still, after everything? Wade felt his heart hammering. And not from fever this time. Eleanor, Mama? James appeared in the doorway, hair sticking up at all angles. Is Pa better? The boy had started calling him Pa sometime during the night. Wade realized. The simple word hit him like a physical blow. Come here, son, Wade said roughly. James scrambled onto the bed, careful of the bandaged shoulder. I'm gonna be fine. Your mama made sure of that. I was scared, James admitted in a small voice. When you didn't come home. I know. I'm sorry I scared you. Wade met Eleanor's eyes over the boy's head. But I'll always come home. Always. That's a promise. The recovery was slow and frustrating. Wade had never been good at being still, and enforced bed rest chafed at him like a too-tight collar. Eleanor managed him with a combination of firmness and humor, keeping him occupied with ranch accounts and James's lessons. You're a terrible patient, she informed him one afternoon, confiscating the boots he'd been trying to put on. Worse than James when he had the measles. I need to check this stock. That fence in the east pasture is being handled by Tom Peterson and his boys. Neighbor helping neighbor. Remember? That was your wife's idea, I believe. She said it teasingly, but Wade heard the question underneath. Your wife. Was that what she was? Truly? Or still just a convenient arrangement? Eleanor, he began. But she was already moving away. Always busy. Always one step ahead of any serious conversation. It was James who finally forced the issue. One evening, as Eleanor was changing Wade's bandage, the boy asked, When I grow up, will I find a wife like Mama? Eleanor's hand stilled. What makes you ask that? Billy Cooper says his PA told him that marriage is about love and stuff. But Tommy Morrison said you and Pa got married for different reasons. The boy's face scrunched in confusion. I don't understand. Wade felt Eleanor tense beside him. This was it, the moment of truth they'd been dancing around. James, Wade said carefully. Sometimes people get married for lots of reasons. Your mama and we got married because we needed each other. I needed help with the ranch, and she needed a home for you both. The boy considered this. But you love each other now, right? The question hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor's hands had resumed their work, but Wade could feel her waiting. Yes, Wade said firmly, catching Eleanor's hand. I love your mama, more than I ever thought I could love anyone again. Eleanor's breath caught. Samuel, it's true, he continued, holding her gaze. I married you to save face, to satisfy the town. But somewhere along the way, you saved my soul. You brought me back to life. Eleanor, you and James both. Tears were streaming down Eleanor's face. I love you too. I've loved you since the night of the storm. Maybe before. I just didn't know how to say it. Gross, James announced, but he was grinning. Does this mean we're a real family now? Wade pulled them both close, ignoring the protest from his shoulder. We've been a real family for a while now. Son, it just took us grown-ups a bit to figure it out. That night, after James was asleep, Eleanor came to Wade's room, not to tend his wound or bring him water, but simply to be with him. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly shy. I meant what I said. She whispered, I love you, and I meant what I said. Wade touched her face gently. You saved me, Eleanor. In every way a person can be saved. She leaned into his touch. We saved each other. That's what partners do. They talked through the night, sharing dreams and fears, making plans for the future. Wade told her about Margaret and Lucy. The good memories this time. Not just the loss. Eleanor shared her own past. The struggles of widowhood. The fear of being unwanted and burdensome. "You were never a burden," Wade said fiercely. "Never. I know that now." She smiled. "Just as you know you weren't responsible for what happened to your family. We can't change the past, Samuel, but we can choose our future." As dawn broke, they were still talking, hands entwined, hearts finally open. Wade's shoulder ached, but he barely noticed. He was too full of wonder at this second chance at happiness, this unexpected gift of love in a hard land. "The town was wrong," Eleanor murmured as sleep finally claimed them. "You didn't take me to save face." "No?" Wade asked drowsily. "No. You took me because fate knew we needed each other, even if we didn't know it yet." Wade smiled against her hair. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps some things were meant to be, written in the stars over the desert, planned by a providence that knew better than stubborn humans what they truly needed. The recovery continued, marked by small milestones. The first day Wade could dress himself. The first time he could walk to the barn without exhaustion. The first time he could hold Eleanor properly, without his shoulders screaming in protest. And through it all, the transformation of their marriage from arrangement to true partnership. Eleanor moved her things to Wade's room. They began making decisions together, planning improvements to the ranch, discussing James's education. The town noticed the change. When the Wade family appeared at church, there was a new ease between them, a warmth that had nothing to do with keeping up appearances. "Marriage suits you both," Pastor Williams commented after service. "I'm glad to see it." "So are we," Eleanor replied, her hand firmly in Wade's. "So are we." Even crusty old Garrett mentioned it. "Your wife's made a new man of you. Wade, about time someone knocked sense into that thick skull." Wade couldn't argue. He was a new man. The walls he'd built after losing Margaret and Lucy hadn't just imprisoned his heart. They'd nearly killed his soul. Eleanor had torn them down with patience and courage and love, showing him that the risk of loving again was worth the fear of loss. The whispers started at the general store. Mrs. Patterson, ever eager to stir the pot, was holding court near the fabric counter when Eleanor entered with her weekly list. "Of course, we all understand why Samuel Wade married her," Mrs. Patterson was saying to her circle of listeners. "A man needs help with his ranch, and she needed a roof over her head. But now that she's gotten comfortable, well," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "Martha Henderson says she saw Eleanor coming out of the bank last week. Alone. What business does a woman have at the bank without her husband?" Eleanor's steps faltered for just a moment. Then she lifted her chin and continued to the counter. She'd learned that confronting gossip directly only fed it. "Morning, Mrs. Mrs. Wade." "Mr." Murphy greeted her, shooting a disapproving look at the gossip circle. "Good morning, Mr. Murphy. I have a list." Eleanor kept her voice steady. Though the old name stung, some people, it seemed, would never let her forget her origins. The whispers followed her through her shopping, growing bolder. "She's changed him," Mrs. Cooper added. "He used to know his place, kept to himself. Now they're acting like they own the valley." "And did you see her at the last social?" Another voice chimed in. "Wearing that new dress, teaching the other women about her accounting methods. As if we need some Missouri widow telling us how to manage our households." Eleanor paid for her goods and left without acknowledging the talk, but the words burrowed under her skin like thorns. She'd thought they'd moved past this, that proving herself during the drought and the gang trouble would have earned her place. But small towns had long memories and cherished grudges. The situation worsened when Harold Morrison from the bank arrived at the ranch that afternoon. Eleanor saw him coming and called Wade from the barn. "Morrison." Wade greeted curtly. "What brings you out here?" The banker dismounted, pulling out his ever-present ledger. "I'm afraid there's been a development. It's come to my attention that your wife has been making inquiries about your accounts." "So?" Wade's voice was dangerous quiet. Well, it's highly irregular. A woman involving herself in financial matters. Morrison adjusted his spectacles nervously. Some members of the board are concerned. Concerned about what exactly? Eleanor stepped forward. That I can read, that I can add figures, that I helped save this ranch from foreclosure. Morrison flushed. Mrs. Wade, please understand, it's not personal, but there are proper ways things are done. Get off my land. Wade's voice cut through Morrison's excuses like a blade. Now, Samuel, be reasonable. I said get off my land. My wife has more sense in her little finger than your whole board combined. She saved this ranch when you vultures were circling. And if she wants to check our accounts, help with the books, or dance on the bank roof at midnight, that's our business. Morrison retreated hastily, but the damage was done. Word spread that the Wades were difficult, that Eleanor was overstepping bounds, that Samuel was letting his wife rule the roost. The social freeze began subtly. Invitations that would normally come stopped arriving. At church, spaces appeared on the pew and the Wade family sat down. James noticed first. Why don't the other kids want to play with me anymore? He asked one Sunday after another rejection. Eleanor's heart broke. Some people are just narrow-minded. Sweetheart, it's not about you. But it was about them. All of them. And the unconventional way their family had formed. The town had accepted the marriage when it solved a problem. A widow in need. A rancher requiring respectability. But a true partnership. A love match grown from convenience. That threatened the order of things. The crisis came to a head over, of all things, a piece of land. The old Baxter place, abandoned for years, came up for sale. It bordered Wade's ranch, and the water rights alone would secure their future. Eleanor had been quietly saving, planning, and when she presented Wade with the figures showing they could afford it, he'd been amazed. How did you manage this? Careful accounting, selling eggs, taking in sewing, the money from helping Mrs. Garrett with her books. She showed him the detailed ledger. We can do this, Samuel. We can secure James's future. They put in their bid, only to find it mysteriously rejected. The land went instead to Nathan Price, Mrs. Patterson's son-in-law, for considerably less than the Wades had offered. This is wrong, Eleanor fumed, pacing their kitchen. We had the highest bid. I know we did. Doesn't matter what we know, Wade said grimly. Matters what we can prove. Eleanor's eyes sparked. Then we prove it. She threw herself into investigation with the same determination she'd brought to everything else. She tracked down the clerk who'd handled the bids, sweet-talked information from the banker's secretary, pieced together a trail of favoritism and backroom deals. They rigged it, she told Wade triumphantly. The whole thing. Price never had the money. It was fronted by a group of town investors who wanted to keep us from expanding. Why? Eleanor's expression was bitter. Because we're getting too successful, too independent, because I don't know my place, and you don't keep me in it. Wade felt rage build in his chest, the kind he hadn't felt since the night raiders took his first family. But this was a different kind of violence, social, economic, aimed at crushing spirits rather than bodies. We fight back, he said. How? They own the town council, the bank, not everyone. Wade stood, decision crystallizing. There are others like us, others who've been pushed aside, deemed not quite good enough. We unite them. The campaign began quietly. Wade and Eleanor visited the Mexican families who worked the mines. The Chinese merchants kept to the town's edges. The other undesirable elements who'd been systematically excluded from the town's power structure. They found allies in unexpected places. Dr. Morrison, disgusted by his brother's banking practices. The Garrett family, who'd never forgotten Eleanor's help during the drought. The town meeting where they presented their evidence was electric with tension. Eleanor stood before the assembled crowd, ledgers and documents in hand, and laid out the corruption piece by piece. Price's face grew redder with each revelation, while Mrs. Patterson looked ready to faint. This is preposterous. Price blustered. You're going to take the word of a woman, a former widow who married for security, over respectable citizens? Yes. Tom Garrett stood up. I am, because that woman saved half this valley during the drought, because she and Wade organized us against the gang, because she's proven herself 10 times over while you've done nothing but line your own pockets. Others stood too, the families who'd been helped, who'd seen Eleanor's courage and Wade's transformation. Soon, more were standing than sitting. The council had no choice but to order a review of the land sale. Within a week, it was overturned, the Baxter place going to the Wades as it should have from the beginning. But victory came with a price. The establishment might have lost this battle, but they didn't forgive. The whispers turned to open hostility. Someone poisoned one of their wells. Fences were cut. One night, rocks came through their windows with notes attached. Know your place. Maybe we should move, Eleanor said one night, holding a sobbing James after schoolyard bullies had given him a black eye. Start fresh somewhere else. No. Wade's voice was firm. This is our home. We built it. We bled for it, and we're not letting small-minded fools drive us out. But James will learn to stand up for himself, just like his parents did. Wade knelt beside his son. James, look at me. Are you ashamed of us, of your mother for being smart and strong, of me for recognizing that? No, sir. James sniffled. Billy's PA says Ma doesn't act like a proper lady, but I think she's the best lady in the whole valley. So do I, son. So do I. And anyone who can't see that isn't worth our time. Slowly, things began to shift. The younger generation, watching Eleanor's competence and the Wade family's success, started questioning the old ways. Some of the women, tired of being dismissed and overlooked, began asking Eleanor to teach them her accounting methods. The Mexican and Chinese families, empowered by the Wade stand, started asserting their own rights. Change came hard in a place set in its ways, but it came nonetheless. When Eleanor opened a small school to teach arithmetic and writing to anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of race or gender, the old guard protested. When half the valley's children showed up anyway, the protests quieted. You're a revolutionary, Wade told her one evening, watching her prepare lessons. Eleanor laughed. I'm just a woman who believes everyone deserves a chance. Is that so radical? Out here, yes. He pulled her close. And I love you for it. The final confrontation came at the harvest dance. The Wades attended despite knowing they'd face hostility. They'd earned their place in this community and wouldn't be driven into hiding. Mrs. Patterson, emboldened by whiskey punch, confronted Eleanor directly. You must be so proud, she said loudly, ensuring an audience. Climbing from desperate widow to ranch owner's wife, though we all know the price you paid for it. The music stopped. The crowd held its breath. Eleanor stepped forward, calm and dignified. Yes, I am proud. Proud to have survived loss. Proud to have found love with a good man. Proud to have built a life through honest work. Can you say the same? Mrs. Patterson? Or have you spent so long tearing others down that you've forgotten how to build anything yourself? How dare you? I dare because I've earned the right. Every slight, every whisper, every attempt to break us has only made us stronger. You called me a climber. Fine, I climbed. From grief to joy. From poverty to prosperity. From loneliness to love. And I did it honestly. With these two hands and this man by my side. She turned to address the whole room. You want to know the truth about my marriage? Samuel Wade didn't take me to save face. He took me because two broken people recognized they might heal together. And we have, not in spite of your judgment, but because of it. Every challenge you threw at us only proved we were meant to stand together. Wade stepped beside her, taking her hand. My wife speaks truth. You want to judge us? Go ahead. But while you're whispering in corners, we'll be building. While you're clinging to the past, we'll be creating the future. And our door remains open to anyone willing to work alongside us, regardless of where they came from or what the gossips say. The silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then, from the back of the room, someone started clapping. Dr. Morrison, then Garrett, then others, until half the room was applauding while the other half stood in scandalized silence. Mrs. Patterson gathered her skirts and swept out, followed by her coterie, but they were fewer than before, their power diminished by their own petty hatred. The music resumed. Couples began dancing again, and when Wade led Eleanor onto the floor, the space that formed around them wasn't from avoidance, but from respect. "Do you regret it?" Eleanor asked as they waltzed. "The fights, the struggles, the cost of standing by me?" Wade spun her, then pulled her close. "The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to see you truly. You're worth 100 Mrs. Pattersons." "Just 100?" she teased. 1,000, 1,000,000. He grew serious. "Eleanor, you didn't just save my soul. You helped me find it again. Whatever battles we face together." As they danced, James joined them, and they made room, the three of them moving together in their own small circle of belonging. Around them, the town continued its slow transformation, old prejudices dying hard but dying nonetheless, because that's what love did, not the fairy tale kind that conquered all in a blaze of glory, but the real kind, built on mutual respect and shared struggle. It changed people, it changed communities, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, it changed the world, one small stand at a time. The rancher had indeed taken the widow to save face, but in saving his soul, she'd saved so much more. A family, a community, a future where James and children like him could grow up knowing that love and respect mattered more than convention. That partnership meant more than dominance, and that the true measure of a person lay not in their past but in their courage to face each new day with hope. The sunset painted the valley in shades of gold and crimson, transforming the harsh landscape into something almost magical. Wade stood on the porch of the house that had weathered so many storms, both literal and metaphorical, watching the cattle graze peacefully in the distance. The eastern pasture, once a point of contention, now stretched green with carefully managed grass, the result of the water rights from the Baxter place. "Penny for your thoughts?" Eleanor emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Even after 2 years of marriage, Wade's heart still skipped when he looked at her. "Just thinking how different it all looks now," he said, pulling her close. "The land's the same, but everything else has changed," she finished. "Including us." It was true. The man who'd stood on this same porch, isolated and bitter, seemed like a stranger now. That man couldn't have imagined the fullness of the life he now lived, the laughter that regularly rang through the house, the sense of purpose that came from building something together, the quiet contentment of being truly known and loved. James burst through the door, now 7 and tall for his age, clutching a slate covered in figures. "Ma, I finished the problems. Can I go help Pa with the horses now?" Eleanor checked his work with the practiced eye of a teacher. Her small school had grown beyond their wildest expectations, bringing in enough income to hire help for the ranch. "These are perfect, sweetheart. You're getting so good at multiplication." "It's 'cause you're the best teacher in the whole territory," James declared, then looked at Wade. "Can we work with the new colt today?" "After chores," Wade said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Responsibility first, then rewards." As James ran off to gather eggs, Wade and Eleanor settled into the comfortable rhythm of evening tasks. She worked on lesson plans for the next day while he mended tack, but their conversation flowed easily between them. Maria Gonzalez asked if she could attend the advanced arithmetic class. Eleanor mentioned. Her father finally agreed. "Good. That girl's got a sharp mind." Wade smiled, remembering his own initial resistance to Eleanor's radical ideas. "Never thought I'd see the day when Miguel Gonzalez would send his daughter to school." "Times are changing, Samuel, slowly, but they are changing." The changes were evident throughout the valley. Eleanor's school had become a bridge between communities that had long stood apart. Anglo children learned Spanish songs from their Mexican classmates. Chinese students taught others to use the abacus, and all of them learned that their differences were smaller than their shared dreams. "Mrs. Patterson called on me today," Eleanor said casually, though Wade caught the significance in her tone. He looked up sharply. "Patricia Patterson? What did she want?" "To apologize." Eleanor's smile held a touch of triumph. "And to ask if I'd teach her granddaughter. Seems young Mary has a head for numbers. And Mrs. Patterson has finally accepted that perhaps a woman understanding finances isn't the scandal she once thought." Wade shook his head in amazement. "Never thought I'd see that day either." "Pride eventually bends to practicality," Eleanor said philosophically. "Her son-in-law, Price, made some bad investments. They need Mary to marry well, and educated women are becoming more sought after, even out here." As if summoned by the mention of change, Tom Garrett rode up the path. Over the past 2 years, he'd become one of their closest allies. His initial skepticism transformed into genuine friendship. "Evening, Wade, Eleanor." He tipped his hat. "Wanted to let you know the Cattle Association voted. You're in, Wade. Unanimous decision." Wade stood slowly, hardly believing it. The Cattle Growers Association had been closed to him since the day he'd married Eleanor, their way of showing disapproval. This acceptance meant more than just business advantages. It was recognition, belonging. "Unanimous?" Eleanor asked, her hand finding Wade's. "Even Patterson voted yes." Tom grinned. "Seems your wife's business acumen has made your ranch one of the most profitable in the valley. Can't argue with success." After Tom left with promises to return for Sunday dinner, Wade and Eleanor stood together in the gathering dusk. The weight of how far they'd come settled over them like a comfortable blanket. "I have something to tell you," Eleanor said softly. "I was waiting for the right moment." Wade turned to her, seeing a mix of joy and uncertainty in her eyes. "What is it?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The world seemed to stop. Wade stared at her, then at their joined hands, feeling a flutter of movement beneath his palm. Joy, terror, and wonder crashed through him in equal measure. "A baby," he breathed. "Eleanor, is everything?" "I'm fine, Doctor. Morrison says I'm healthy as a horse." She smiled tremulously. "Are you happy?" Wade pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. Happy doesn't begin to cover it. Terrified, amazed, grateful. He pulled back to look at her. "I thought I'd lost my chance at this. After Margaret and Lucy, I never dreamed. This child will know its father," Eleanor said firmly. "Will grow up with the love and laughter and the strongest family in the valley. I promise you that. Samuel." James's reaction to the news was pure joy. "A baby! Can I teach it to ride? Will it call me brother? Can I help name it?" "Yes to all of that," Wade assured him, marveling at how naturally James had become his son in every way that mattered. As Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, the community that had once shunned them rallied around. Women who'd whispered behind Eleanor's back now brought baby clothes and advice. Men who'd questioned Wade's choices offered congratulations and help with the heavier ranch work. Funny how a baby changes things, Eleanor mused one day, sorting through the pile of gifts. Suddenly, we're not a scandal anymore. "We're a family. We were always a family," Wade corrected. "Now they just can't deny it." The transformation was complete when Pastor Williams asked them to host the church social, an honor reserved for the valley's most respected families. As Wade watched Eleanor directing preparations, James helping with decorations, their neighbors working together regardless of origin or past conflicts, he felt a peace he'd thought lost forever. The old Wade would have scoffed at hosting such gatherings. That man had built walls so high and thick that light couldn't penetrate. But Eleanor had shown him that walls could become bridges if you were brave enough to tear them down and rebuild. "Samuel," Eleanor called. Could you help Mrs. Martinez with these tables?" He went gladly. No longer the isolated rancher who'd grudgingly taken a widow to save face. He was Samuel Wade. Husband, father, neighbor, friend. A man who'd learned that saving face meant nothing compared to saving your soul. The social was a success that would be talked about for years, not because of anything grand or spectacular, but because of the simple sight of the valley's diverse communities breaking bread together, their children playing without regard for the divisions that had separated their parents. As the evening wound down, Wade found himself back on the porch, Eleanor beside him despite her advancing pregnancy. James dozed against her shoulder, worn out from running with the other children. The stars wheeled overhead in the vast western sky, indifferent and eternal. "Do you remember," Eleanor said softly, "that first night? How we sat at opposite ends of the house, strangers bound by necessity?" "I remember." Wade's arm tightened around her. "I was so certain I had nothing left to give, and I was certain I was nothing but a burden." She laughed quietly. "We were both wrong. Spectacularly wrong." Wade agreed. He felt the baby kick under his hand and marveled again at the miracle of second chances. "Eleanor, I need to say something." She turned to him, waiting. "They all say it wrong," he continued. "The whole valley. They say the rancher took the widow to save face, but that's not what happened. No? No." He looked into her eyes, seeing in them the future, their children growing strong and free, their land prospering, their love deepening with each passing year. The widow took the rancher, took his broken pieces and showed him how to build something new, took his emptiness and filled it with purpose, took his grief and transformed it into joy. Eleanor's eyes shimmered with tears. "We took each other," she corrected gently, "and in saving face, we found grace." Wade considered this, then nodded. The rancher took the widow to save face, but she saved his soul. He quoted their story. Though maybe it should be, they saved each other. "I like our version better," Eleanor said. "It has more poetry." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars, feeling the baby move between them, listening to James's peaceful breathing. The house that had once echoed with loneliness now hummed with life. The land that had seemed so harsh now felt like the only place they could have forged this unlikely, beautiful family. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and another answered. Even the wild things knew the value of companionship in a hard land. Wade pressed a kiss to Eleanor's temple, then to James's sleeping head, and finally laid his hand once more on the promise of new life growing within his wife. The rancher had indeed taken the widow to save face, but in the end, salvation had come not from maintaining appearances, but from having the courage to shatter them. In their place had grown something real and true and lasting, a love strong enough to transform not just two broken people, but an entire community. As they finally headed inside, Wade paused at the door for one last look at the star-studded sky. Somewhere up there, he liked to think Margaret and Lucy were watching, glad that he'd found his way back to love. The thought no longer brought pain, only a gentle ache of remembrance mixed with gratitude. "Coming?" Eleanor asked from inside, her voice warm with love and belonging. "Coming," Wade answered, and stepped through the door of the home they'd built together, where broken hearts had learned to beat again, and where saving face had become saving grace. The story of the rancher and the widow would be told for generations in that valley, changing a little with each telling but always keeping its essential truth, that love could bloom in the most unlikely soil, that courage could overcome convention, and that sometimes, in trying to save appearances, we might just save our souls. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps working on the ranch yourself? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reactions make this journey through the American frontier even more special. Until our next adventure, partners.